Hello, welcome to the Big Strategy Podcast. I'm your host and fellow strategist, Jeff Eyet. This is your go-to spot for real talk with the masterminds of business strategy. It's about sharing stories, insights, and those little nuggets of wisdom to help you unlock big growth. Let's turn the key and spring into action.
So, Sarah, welcome to the show, and tell us, as university instructors, do students even need us anymore with AI?
Well, thank you for having me, Jeff. And that's a great question, which I will get to. I do think they need us. So here's my take on it. I feel like students need us more than ever, but they need us in person more than ever. They need us in a social and embodied space because that is something that I don't think an AI can do, certainly not now, probably not ever. And so, yes, I think that students need us more than ever, and they need us in order to use some of this new technology.
I agree, and it aligns with our shared belief in human-centered fill-in-the-blank technology. Today, it's AI, but being true to the human experience, user-centered outcomes, and augmenting the technology, certainly not replacing folks. So, Sarah, tell us a little bit more about yourself so folks can understand what you do and your role in this summer's Summer Reads series.
Okay, well, I'm excited about your Summer Reads series. This is great. I am an English professor. At least that used to be my title. For some reason, it's Professor of Communication now. I work at Florida State College at Jacksonville, where I work in the Department of Communication. And so we have speech and we have letters. But essentially, English professor. I teach writing mostly. I teach film as well. And I teach literature. And I teach not filmmaking, but film as storytelling. So those are kind of my three big classes, mostly freshman and sophomore classes. Florida State College at Jacksonville is not a university. It's a state college. And we do have lots of four-year degrees, but historically we were a community college. So how I got to AI is because I'm a writing teacher, because I teach writing, but also because I'm an author. So in the past, I've published a couple books on science fiction and television, love science fiction, love television series, wrote a book on Lost. It's mostly nonfiction is what I write. But I just finished my first novel in 2022, which I just promptly left behind. I was on sabbatical 2022, 2023. And I finished it the fall of 2022, the novel. And it was my first one. Big fiction publication. And I kind of abandoned it because I looked at the top five, the big five publishers, and I was just overwhelmed. And then there was AI, of course. I was also working on a book, which I'm still working on for students. And this turned into a podcast at the time because I was like, does anybody really read books? So I was like, I'm going to start as a podcast. It's now a Substack. But anyway, long story short, when I got back to school in the next fall after my sabbatical, we had an AI advisory board. I was recruited. I was like, hey, why don't we podcast and talk about this? And they were like, why don't you be the podcast host? And why don't you produce this? And I was like,
great idea.
Okay. And so I kind of abandoned my podcast, which was more of a kind of in the wellness space. It was for young adults, kind of how to transition into adulthood for my college students. But it became very much about, just stay grounded, get embodied, not so much woo-woo, but kind of like practical tips for like not to have so much anxiety. Anyway, got back to the college. Yeah, I'm on the AI advisory board now. And I learned all these podcasting tools and I was learning all about AI and everything. And so we started AI Goes to College, which I'm the host of now. And our summer thing is Summer Chats. So we have but it was really a limited podcast series where we're just like, what do we do? What do we do? And so it seemed appropriate that as a writing professor that I would host it. So that's me. That was probably more than you wanted to hear. But,
and folks have a great idea now about why I thought it was so important to have you on the show. So thank you again. I tell it's summer, and so a lot of folks are having that, whether it's leaders whose children are going on to college, or some of our listeners are folks who are either on their way or into college. And you had mentioned that your son is on his way to college. So gosh, that's probably a scary thought. And I haven't reached it yet, but that someday my daughter could be my student, which is kind of mind-blowing in its own weird way, but true. Um,
It's crazy. Yeah.
it's insane. So like why I believe English majors, philosophy majors, right? The traditional liberal arts education is now more important than ever because I don't think AI has the ability to share the same experience that humans do and have lived as deep of experiences as we do. So from your perspective, was it more strategic in that sense, your adoption of AI, or was it more tactical, like you were seeing AI generated papers and, students were kind of like giving you this like blah, skipping the water language that was, inch deep, mile wide. What drove you? Was it strategic or tactical?
I think it was just from the perspective of a creative. I was fascinated with AI, especially since I was on sabbatical. I strictly saw myself as a creative at that moment. And so I came back to it with a kind of an open mind rather than a defensive mode. I was like, look what I can do. It can do all those things I don't want to do, or it can organize my, my wild thoughts. And then when I came back, it was like we were in this huge battle within the department, as we still are. So then I started seeing the AI generated papers. But I think initially I thought, oh, look, maybe, going back to the book, I thought, maybe I don't have to deal with editors as much or agents or publishers. And, maybe I can do some of this myself. So that was my first approach. And then when I saw how many other faculty members were just saying just no AI and just kind of turning that off altogether and just kind of denying it, and I had already been engaging with these tools, I thought, we need to be learning our disciplines that much more, just like you said. Like, I think, if you're going to become a lawyer, please learn law, I think you need to like really dig into that. It's not about that. We need that more than ever. But I was already engaged with the tools at the time. And I thought, okay, we're going to have to switch our learning outcomes altogether. We're just going to have to flip the whole thing, because the thing that I had always looked for in terms of assessment, I don't give exams. Like, I assess based on how well they write. So how am I supposed to do that when they can already create that product? How can I find the process rather than the product? So I kind of had to flip that. And I think I'm still in the process of doing that, because I don't think there's a clear path yet. And I think we're kind of making our path.
So well said. It is not a clear path, but you framed it really well in the beginning. And I think it speaks a lot to just your personality, as I know you. And that's this approaching it with an open-minded, a yes and mindset, as opposed to a defensive yes but mindset, or maybe a no but mindset. The level of creativity that has been unlocked is exponential. And I can speak from my own personal experience, but yet in my experience of writing, it can't replace what a human generates. I think, as I mentioned earlier, it uses this accelerationist language. It uses overprescribed structures, like everything's in orders of 3, and it's putting dashes where there should be commas, and instead of punctuation. Right, we can get into the very grammatical nuances, but there's also a generic overall structure that it takes, at least in my experience. Right. And again, my reaction can be, well, if I see that in a student's work, I know they used AI, and my mind flips a little bit into more of a punitive space, my word, than a chance to view it as a growth opportunity. Like, hey, I know you win AI here. Mm-hmm. I told you could use it. I always tell my students, I'm not saying you can't use it, but if you do choose to use AI, like, don't expect an A. You might get it. And if you're really good at it, you can probably get an A. But just, throwing my questions into AI and regurgitating a response, that's not going to get you A work. And I think that is important for business as well, is if you're getting an outreach email or meeting summaries or things that are just, they lack that je ne sais quoi, right? Of the human, of my lens, of my interpretation. So if I were to kind of throw it back to you as a question, is, do you sense like a sterility coming in because of AI, or are you seeing AI elevating your own personal work, but also that of your students?
Okay, so I have an example from my own
Please.
work, but let me just address the students. And I just have to say, I love the improv spirit with the yes and.
Thank you.
Yeah, so with my students, what I really don't appreciate, and this is with colleagues too. So I got this crazy long-winded response from a colleague in an email that made no sense because I know her and I know her tone, and I had asked her a really straightforward question, and I felt like she had done this thing where she was like, well, she was uncomfortable with what we were talking about, and so she popped it into ChatGPT to tone it down or to create a softer tone. Anyway, don't appreciate that, and I also don't appreciate like when I get essays or just I see it a lot in discussion boards, right? So I try not to do discussion boards anymore at all with these asynchronous classes, but when you get that outline kind of format in a response from a student and they haven't used it, even though I do say as well, like I say, you can use it if you cite it. If you are sophisticated enough to kind of know what you're doing with it, please tell me about it. Like, tell me about like how you used it. But a lot of times what I get is just, very empty responses. So I teach a film class where I have 10 films that I just absolutely love. And I gush over, to the students and I say, hey, I want your authentic viewing experience. Yes, we're going to learn about lighting. Yes, we're going to learn about sound and all of these other things. But I really want to know, like, how did you feel? Like, I even use her now, Spike Jonze is her. So we're super meta about it. But I really want to know, how do you feel? But so, I really don't appreciate getting a canned response. But I hate the outline, the ChatGPT, I'm like, what are these bullets? I asked for like one paragraph of I don't need bullets, of every single vocab word.
Bullets are not part of a paragraph. No.
But my example from my own experience with a book, which it's so interesting. Like I didn't think about it until like when I look back, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I finished that book right when people were like, look, we can use AI to help us write books. So I'm like, I'm so glad I finished that. But when I went back to edit and I used it as an editor or with some parts, which was impossible almost, so it almost took more work than just my regular editor. So anyways, but when I did some experiments and I changed some wording, I changed some dialogue, I know exactly, because I just did like a whole read through of this book again. So I'm finally back. Finally, it's been almost 3 years, finally back to this novel. Did a whole read through and I know exactly where I had AI help me. And I'm like, this character would not say that. Like, what wacky thing happened here? And I was like, oh, that's when I was experimenting and having it help me with a little dialogue. And it was so like snarky and weird. And like, it just wasn't me. It wasn't my pacing. It wasn't my voice. It was so interesting to see because when I was doing it, like, even though I knew what I was doing and I knew that, I'm kind of playing around with it, it stood out. And so looking back on it, it makes me realize like, you're not really getting away with AI writing when you're publishing, like it's okay sometimes. Like I love being able to use AI in new and interesting ways as an editor. And sometimes it's a much better, it's a way better resume writer, anything that's kind of standard. So that's,
I appreciate that. And my own journey as an author, it comes back to, you're right. When you use it as an editor, it just takes more time than if you had engaged someone and stuck to that tried and true process. What I also find it doing is that it takes me back to a lot of the classics. And I think we're going to understand that there is a line of demarcation between pre-AI and post-AI writing because it is a different quality. It is a different experience. I find myself approaching the pre-AI books with a lot more interest. And I'm allowing myself to be taken on the ride by the classics. But books that I know are in this age of AI, I read them with a lot more skeptical eye. Am I getting fed something or am I really being told and learned? I don't know. I don't want to lose that sense of joy and creativity and excitement and surrender as a reader. But it's not apples to apples, unfortunately, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thought, just kind of like what that's going to look like, because I'm sure we'll see that clear line in the future of how things change. And I don't know what it's going to look like because I use it all the time to think through new ideas. I think that's probably the most, this is evolving. But for me, when I get a new idea that I think is a new idea, of course, no idea is that new, but when I think I get a new idea, to talk through it with maybe, especially with the new voice mode with ChatGPT, obviously I think, I'm probably giving away these ideas to who knows, to, Sam Altman, right. I don't know. But, at the same time, that's more valuable to me than the final thing. And even if I'm like, hey, create an outline of this, create this paragraph, I always change it. Always. I change it so much it doesn't look the same. But I'm like, I needed that writing. That was a great writing partner, but I don't want to use anything he said. I'm just going to change everything.
At the Berkeley Innovation Group, we are a strategy consultancy and AI advisory firm focused on mid-market companies looking to unlock big growth. In contrast to management consultants' typical top-down, hypothesis-driven approach, Big uses a curiosity-inspired, bottom-up approach, leveraging customer insights to drive strategy co-creation. Learn more about our approach by downloading our ebook at biginnovates.com/ebook. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back. Well, Sarah, you've talked quite a bit about how AI works as a creative partner and AI shortcomings as an editor or synthesizer refinement of that voice and remaining authentically human. You talk about teaching and then also extending to your own writing. Tell us more about what you write about, why you're so passionate about it, and how this process of writing has helped develop you professionally.
Yeah. So as I said, in the recent past, I was starting a book. This is not the novel, but this is my nonfiction book for students that turned into a podcast. And the podcast is called Lifiness. And it's all about the embodiment, the feeling of embodiment to help with mental health, right? So it's for transitioning into adulthood. And I would say I'm still at the beginning of this journey because, like I said, I had to kind of sidestep it so I could do some, AI direct things for college, for the college that I work for, which I love doing as well. But I feel like we're at this tipping point in education. So even though I was directing, as I started that draft and then it became a podcast, I was directing it for my audience was young adults and, kind of how to transition into adulthood. It's more about, it's kind of bringing it back to education now. It's just kind of how we are living in these really like disembodied systems, right? And education can be one of them because so many students from COVID on have been doing a lot of online learning. We're not in the classroom together as much as we have been in the past. So not necessarily in direct conflict with artificial intelligence, but kind of like as an addition to my passion for artificial intelligence, I've started writing about natural intelligence. And for me, that is what it's kind of what I've been doing all along, like feel into your body, feel, use your intuition to learn some of the concepts we're learning. And it's so much more important than ever to stay connected to that now that we have LLMs at our fingertips, and I think at first, like 2.5 years ago, my students weren't really on that train. And, some of them, because, there is this gap, this tech gap. It takes a while to kind of catch up, to some of our students who are a little bit more underprepared. But anyways, everybody has it now, right? And so as I write and as I kind of develop these ideas, which like I said, I'm kind of at the beginning of this journey, I'm implementing them in the classroom. I'm also implementing them with employees. So I do workshops at the college and I offer it to other colleges as well, where I'm like, okay, we're in the middle of the workday. We're up here. I call it like dropping your brain back into your body. Because whether, you're an academic and you're just kind of always in this world of, theoretical ideas, or whether you're just scrolling all day long as a student, you're scrolling, and you're not really in your body. I try to get students back into their bodies, back into social spaces, and then employees as well. That's just kind of like something I offer as an addition. So I'm a meditation teacher too. Before I didn't mention that before.
I was going to ask you what other inspirations did you bring to this endeavor? Because it sounds more holistic than the usual approach.
It really is. And so it's very ironic that I've become like this AI expert at my college because I'm like, y'all, I just want to sit and meditate. But I'm a yoga teacher. I'm a Tai Chi teacher, our local gym, a couple of local gyms here. But I'm also the meditation lead at our school. So we have something called Moments of Tranquility. It's for students. It's for employees. Anyway, so I kind of bring that back to the classroom as much as I can. Without being, the woo-woo professor who's like, let's sit and let's sit in modified half lotus. It's more about offering those workshops kind of outside of the classroom. So it's like, if you want to come to Professor Sarah's, workshops, like I have more to offer in terms of learning about yourself and learning about the world. It's not just about what's on the screen. So all of that kind of comes together with this natural intelligence. I like to call it a movement. Everything has to be a business these days. So of course, like I offer workshops, but that's my thing.
Yeah, but that was my question and I think it's very easy to get siloed as a person. Oh, well, that's like you said, it has to be in a business context. So it's a side hustle or whatever they call it. But when you have this ability to diverge, transcending disciplines, and then converge that into something beautiful and rich, as you've talked about, in a way that proves to be, my word, an anecdote to what we're told we need to do. And I think that's really powerful. The example I always tell my students is, you went to high school, you learned so much, and you could go and get a job where you're rewarded for converging on the answer. But that area under the triangle is probably pretty small, representing the amount you'd be paid for that, because you just don't have that much of a knowledge base or that much experience to be able to converge. And then you go to college, and so you expand your knowledge base, right? But you're still expected to converge. And if you get a master's degree, you're widening your knowledge, but you're still expected to converge. And we're never given the time to just ask, are we asking the right question? Are we answering the right question? And AI can be a helpful diverging partner in the sense that it can help you show some previously well-worn paths that maybe you didn't consider. But I don't believe that AI can do this cross-disciplinary work. And maybe it can, and just people don't know how to use it at that level. But I want to hold out and think this is genuinely human, that this cross-disciplinary divergence, as you've discussed, is what's really valuable and going to keep the humanity in what we do, as it becomes so much easier and addicting, frankly, to just find the easy way out with AI.
Yeah. I think learning to use AI in the right way, and I don't want to say the right way, in the creative ways that I've learned to do it, I think that can be so valuable because it can be fun and interesting, and having that, that customized tutor at your fingertips is so valuable. So one thing I didn't mention is that in collaboration with some other colleagues, we've created a new class, an AI literacy class. I think maybe I did, in the Associate of Arts. So it's like a humanities AI class, because we have, of course, in our engineering and computing, we have an AI degree, but this is our first class. So I created this, or I started, and then, we collaborated. And of course, you have to go through so much rigmarole to get any class, encoded. But I think we are offering it this fall. So I'm super excited about that.
Wonderful.
But I mentioned that because when you use it and I think there's a word for this, it's totally like, it's probably a Gen Alpha word, something vibing. Oh, I wish I had this at my fingertips right now. But anyways, I think of it as vibing with AI, and you're doing something that's totally customized to you, and you can really use it, not necessarily even for creative purposes, but for getting to know the ideas that you've put into the system, right? Like, so just say like, hey, I wrote this essay, and then I wrote this other, like, what are my strengths? And can you help me talk through this? Can you help me figure this out? And I know, there's a very fine line between, relying on a computer to be your friend and mentor. But I think if you have the human in the loop, if you have a mentor there, of a human mentor, I think it can be so beautiful to be able to use this, because we can do it on such a broader scale. And when I say broader scale, I'm just thinking that instead of, like say I have 60 students a semester, over the course of like, 3 or 4 classes, there is a lot more I can do. There's a lot better feedback I can give them if I'm using a chatbot that I created for my students and for my class. So it's just kind of like the reason I'm so interested in AI is because I want students to use it correctly. Like I want them to engage with the text in a way that is more meaningful, where they can come back to the conversation and they have a lot more to say, because say we're reading Frankenstein, right? And they were able to ask questions that they would never ask in class, right? That they feel like they're uninformed. And it's like, you know what? Maybe you didn't read the whole chapter. So let's just ask some questions about the chapter. Why don't we get fully informed instead of just not reading the book at all and not being interested at all in the discussion? So there's different levels of this, right? I mean, there's a lot that can be lost if you're just relying on the LLM, but there's a lot that can be gained, especially when you're in a group, when you're in a classroom where you're going to come together as, bodies in a room together, and you're going to talk about it. Because once other people are engaged, they might be like, hey, I should have read that whole chapter. I kind of missed some of those things.
And who knows, maybe it inspires them to find the time to read the next chapter.
Exactly.
I would agree with you in the benefit of a chatbot. Students can engage at their own level, at their own time, at their own pace. One of the things I hear is that it's safe to ask the embarrassing question.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to ask a question that sounds like I didn't read the chapter. So rather than be embarrassed, I just won't say anything. And the purist in me wants to say, well, if you didn't read the chapter, it's hard to have a well-informed opinion. But on the other hand, I mean, let's be honest, how many truly well-informed opinions does anyone have? And so in that respect, at least some exposure to the content can only benefit them. And it allows them to, as we know, the benefit is in the conversation. The benefit is in the discussion. And so if we allow them to come semi-informed, overlaying their own experiences on top of that, it brings a richer experience to class.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there is some value in that transparency of being able to say, oh yeah, I didn't read the chapter, or I didn't pay attention. Or, I was always that dreamy kid who's like, I'm still in a dreamy kid. Yeah, I'm like in a faculty meeting. I'm like, shoot, I was not paying attention to the beginning of this meeting. I'll be like, I wasn't listening. And I'm hesitant to ask that question. So there is a value to transparency, and obviously rigor is important, right? Having standards is very important. But I think what I find beautiful about all of these conversations around AI is that it's really exposing a lot of different things. I feel like it exposes certain things in my own teaching practice. And right before I went on my sabbatical, I was doing a lot of ungrading. So I don't know if you're familiar with the ungrading movement, in which you...
Let's just talk about for our audience benefit.
Okay, so ungrading is where you kind of rethink the whole idea of assessment. So it doesn't mean you're not assessing students. It just means the traditional A, B, C, D, F scale is not as important as the assessment of the more human assessment of, kind of, are they doing the work? And I kind of got to this point because I felt like I would do all these calculations, and obviously, my Canvas, we use Canvas, is doing the calculations for me. But it just felt very tedious and almost petty when I, tell a student, hey, I'm not going to accept that after this date and blah, blah, blah. And this is, and if I would have, they would have gotten a C, and now they're not. And when it comes down to it, I kind of felt like there has to be a different system for this. And so I got away from having every single grade be like that. So I got into pass fail, because we still have grades at our school, of course. So it's not all pass fail. I teach classes where I have to give an A, a B, a C, a D, or an F. But most of my work, a lot of the writing was pass fail. And I have basically what the rubric looks like is like, did you do this? Did you do this thing? Did you at least attempt to do all of these things? And so if they did all of the things, then they passed. I won't go into it anymore, but basically I was getting really interested in ungrading. And then when I came back, I kind of felt like some of my teaching practices and the things that I was doing didn't make sense anymore. Especially when you can get, the complete product from an AI, but also I was wondering, am I helping my students? I'm a communication professor, right? Like, am I helping them communicate better by, penalizing them for not doing MLA format? So I was kind of rethinking that. And I feel like the discussion around AI is really exposing all of us. And I think that's why some professors they're like, hey, I didn't sign up to learn all of this stuff. I didn't sign up to change my pedagogy altogether, and I'm not going to. I'm not going to change anything because that's just too much work. I get it. I mean, I understand it's a lot of work, but I do feel like I have to turn my learning outcomes around a little bit, as much as my college won't let me.
Well, and then we get into other issues, but I want to bring what you shared because I see a lot of parallels back to if I'm an executive at an organization. As an employee, I can use AI to effectively game the traditional assessment review. Just accept that. I think, I'm asking folks to accept that as a given. And so is the case then to clamp down on AI in defense of the existing review mechanism, or is it to go back to that assessment mechanism and say, actually, do we need to revisit this? And I think that's whether one believes in ungrading or not, it's just that openness to reframing what we think is true, understanding that technology is a catalyst to that. When we were both in school, I don't know, I can speak for myself and maybe you're part of this, but you've done research out of books.
Oh, yeah. Of course. Microfiche.
And the internet was cheating, right?
Right.
The internet was cheating. And now you couldn't even find the book, let alone have the choice to use it or not. And so now, look, that's 20, 30 years on, and sure, AI will live that journey. But as a forward-thinking instructor or as a forward-thinking business leader, is there an opportunity to proactively rethink how we assess people, understanding the tools that are available and understanding the tools aren't something to be caught. They're something to adapt how we teach or how we manage so that the tools become an accelerator.
I think that's a really good point. So I feel like at my level, what I was thinking when I said I need to engage with AI and I need to help students learn these tools instead of deny that they're there is because we have a lot of 2-year programs, right? We have a lot of students who they finish a program and they go straight into the work world. So they're going into the world, if they're going into the business world and they don't have any understanding of these AI tools. So that's kind of like where I was starting from. I'm like, so if I am telling them they can't use this and yet they get to work and, everybody else knows how to use them, just kind of like the saying goes, the AI is not going to take your job. Somebody who knows how to use AI is going to take your job. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like where I started with that, kind of changing the assessment. But I think what you're saying is that if you can game the system to kind of like cheat at that at work, what are we doing? Like, what are we assessing and how are we assessing it? I think that same principle is there. How do we change the learning outcome or the work outcome or, it used to be so easy to police this, and now we can't police this anymore. So when you're talking about, like going to college in the 90s, our professors could police this, right? And then later on, they had the plagiarism filters, and we cannot do this. And once I said, oh my gosh, this, I'm not using a plagiarism filter, I'm not using an AI filter. Well, now what? So what am I assessing, and what do I need them to know? And I think it comes down to, again, the human. And maybe it is because my son's about to start college. These students are they're human to me now, right? This is real. And I really want to know, well, what is it that I need for my student to know? What is it that I need for my son to know when he goes out into the work world? That kind of changes the game. I'm not trying to just, police the system. I'm not trying to police their writing. I'm not trying to do that at all. I'm like, down there in the trenches with them. Mm-hmm. What do we need to know, right? And I think we're still asking that question. What do they need to know? How are they going to be best served by us when I only have them maybe 1 or 2 semesters?
What is your, again, viewing it, again, the reframe I'm hearing you talk about is as instructors or as managers, we need to reframe from how is this student going to cheat, air quote, in a way that will make me look bad by making my methods of analysis look bad or my right? Oh, I look like a bad teacher because students are able to use AI in my assignments. Or do we reframe it as this is a stop in their journey? Their AI journey started before me and it will end after me. And what's my role in helping them be responsible? Going back to your framing of this transparency and responsibility, and yet applying rigor.
Yeah. And I mean, when it comes down to learning outcomes specifically for writing and for being a better writer and a better thinker, I have to go back to, kind of those basics, the critical thinking, right? How do we teach critical thinking? Mm-hmm. Well, we can't teach it if, you saw the MIT study recently where they did a study of maybe 50 individuals from ages 18 to 39. And they were tracking kind of neural activity and they assigned them essays, right? So they had to write an essay with AI. They could have AI. Some of them had the internet available, and some of them had nothing. And they tracked the neural activity. And this just came out, and I don't have the specifics right, but it was, mostly like young adults writing essays. And there was very, very little neural activity happening in the group that had LLMs at their fingertips. So I look at that and I think, okay, when I'm assessing, I need to, whether it's they're writing in class on Blue Books or something for me, how do I get that neural activity happening? And again, I think this is above my pay grade for sure to figure all of this out by myself. But I do think I can take some steps to help assess how that's happening and maybe bring them in, as stakeholders, the students themselves. What do you want out of this? If you're supposed to be learning critical thinking in this class with me, which you are, how do you think we can do that better together? And so these are things that are just kind of, they're always coming up when it comes to assessment. But I think you're right. It's a really good comparison to managers. How can managers do this so that we're not all just kind of turning in ChatGPT papers so that I can grade your ChatGPT. So, we're not just assessing everybody else's AI output, which sometimes it feels like that's what we're doing.
Yeah, it's there's nothing more frustrating, at least for me, when it feels just like garbage in, garbage out, right? And at the end of the day, like you said, how does it feel rewarding to both? And going back to something you talked about in terms of discussion boards, right? So students could just copy the discussion board prompt, put it in, get a response, paste it. That's it, right? But if we were to advance that and say, did that at least get the student to engage with that, whereas they may have skipped it in the past? And that's the theory I'm going on this term. We'll see we'll see where it gets me. But I'm going with this theory that even if they go to AI, it's still getting them to engage with the content. And hopefully that will enrich their learning experience.
A colleague of mine, we just had a short little podcast about this, how he calls it his philosophical overhaul. And he says, because he's a philosophy and religion professor, and he says, I am teaching them how to use these AI tools. And that's now his thing. And he's like, and our topics are religion and philosophy. And he's like, and so they're learning, and it's a lot of work. And for him, it's an experiment as well. And I'm kind of not fully there yet, but I like how he's thinking, because sometimes when, it's almost like gamifying it. It's like, okay, we're going to learn this thing and look what we're doing. But it's kind of like what you're saying. Yeah, just kind of experimenting with, okay, you're using it. Well, how sophisticated can you be while you're using it? And can you happen to learn some, business ideas along the way, or some history of religion along the way? And I don't know. I don't know if I'm not fully in. I don't fully buy into that, but I do think that it's an interesting experiment for now.
Let's go back to what you said at the very beginning, and you said about in-person teaching still being so important, which I agree with. And if I am reading a book and I'm interested in something that's mentioned, and I look at the Wikipedia page just to get the history and then go back to the book, maybe it gives me some context in that passage that I'm reading, but it's not really giving me context in terms of the historical time frame, right? I'm not going to have that history. And the same thing goes for an LLM. But what would really reinforce that I don't have with my reading, that I think we could gain in class, is it's the discussion that reinforces the topic. And beyond the discussion, it's the exercises that we do to reinforce that.
Yeah.
So just as an example, I could put a discussion board question in that says, all right, here's the example. Take one of these three personas and write a paragraph response, right? Very simple. And you'd get a lot of GIGO, garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
But if I take the time in class and say, okay, we're going to spend 15 minutes and review that discussion question, now get into a break, 3-person teams, and each of you take that one of those roles and discuss that, A, they'll be more prepared going forward. And B, I frankly wouldn't care if they pulled out ChatGPT and everybody put in that prompt right there on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2 minutes had some talking points and engaged those talking points and counteracted each other. I think at the end of the day, humans want to give their opinion.
Yeah.
They want to talk. And so how do you get through the noise? Because this technology is another layer of noise. How do you get through that noise down to that human experience?
Yeah.
How that applies in work remains to be seen, because it's not, the human experience isn't always valued, but in an academic setting, it certainly can be.
Yeah, for sure.
So what's one thing I haven't asked you about in terms of just your journey with AI, be it as an author, as an instructor, or just a student of the technology yourself, and how it affects us as humans? What's one thing I haven't asked you about that you think is really important for folks to know?
So I want to talk about asynchronous learning, because this is the one thing I'm most concerned about, and I don't think I have a solution. Not that I have a solution for a lot of these things, but I do think it would be something I'd be curious to know what your listeners think about this experiment that I'm doing this summer. So I have an asynchronous film class. It's Introduction to Film. It is film as storytelling. So kind of like teaching a literature class, but it's all movies. And in the past, I've had pretty much the same movies. I have the same 10 to 12 movies. It's a 12-week course. It's asynchronous. So, I make my quirky little videos and I try to get their attention, and but everything is in modules, and it's very similar to corporate training, in a way that you just listen to my videos, you read the corresponding chapter, we learned vocab, we have discussion boards, and it's blah, blah, blah. This semester, though, instead of having a final essay, and I kind of surprised them with this, because seeing as it is asynchronous, like you're not really, you shouldn't have to schedule, certain meeting times, but it's more like office hours. So I'm kind of getting away with it by saying, hey, I need you for 15 minutes. And this takes a lot of my time, but I need them for 15 minutes. And they are going to present their essay to me. They can write some of it. That I don't want them reading the whole thing, but I want them to present their essay for about 7 minutes. Give me your thesis, supporting points. And then for the next 6 minutes, I will interview you about your paper. So basically an oral defense. And the more and more I think about it, of course, I'm sure when I get down to it, because the end of this semester for this semester is early August. I'm sure I'll be dreading it at the time, but it's going to be a scheduling nightmare. But I'm so tired of those final essays, like the big essay with the high stakes, because they say that students use ChatGPT a lot more when the stakes are really high. And I've done this a little bit in my writing classes, and I really notice it's really easy to tell when students have done the reading or not. And so with this, I'm trying to lower the stakes a little bit. It's not like, a huge amount of points, the big amount of points, the big percentage, but I say, hey, we can talk about this. So I want to know that you've watched these two films. It's comparison, contrast. I want to know that you've watched these films. I want you to use your vocabulary, and I want you to be able to present a thesis, but I also want you to be able to talk to me about it. So we're going to do that this semester. And I feel like that's a very different thing than just all their discussion boards. But I've moved almost all the discussions to they have to make a video of themselves. And I say they can read it, but a lot of times I'll hear them reading their response in a video. And I'll go back and I'll have to ask them, what does this word mean? What does that word mean? Because they're just reading something that they got from ChatGPT. So a lot of times I'm not saying, hey, you used AI. I'm saying, hey, this sounds like AI. This sounds like ChatGPT. Or what do you mean by this? Just tell me what you mean by this. And if they can't, then I'm like, why don't we redo this? And then sometimes just engaging in that way, where I'm just talking to them and saying, and they haven't had, if you're going through this just like corporate training and you're just kind of listening, and you're not engaging, then you're not really learning as much. Just like you were saying with your assignment, where if somebody has to kind of lead the conversation or they have to kind of take a role, that's when the learning happens, right? Like the learning only happens when you actually have to practice it yourself. So I personally, what I've taken away from this, this whole AI thing and teach AI in education is that I need to have in-person classes. For me, that's really important. I am coming up with some ideas for how to make asynchronous classes work, but I would like to see a movement of just across the board. We put a premium on those in-person classes. Like what I'd like to see, honestly, is pay me more to come into the classroom, because as we all know, being in person, whether you're going to a retreat or you're doing you're having a meeting in person, it costs more, right? It's more expensive time-wise, takes more resources for all of us as institutions and as people. But I think we get so much more out of it. So that's what I would like to see. And I think that's one of the things that this kind of has revealed, whether it's a combination of COVID and, AI coming into our space. It's that we really need to be together as humans in order to learn, to have like that social embodied learning experience. I think that is like the height of education. Like that is, it's a premium to be able to do that.
Yeah. Well said. And I agree that the premium will be on in-person experiences, which is, I remember we said about 5 years ago,
right?
The premium on in-person experiences, and technology at that time was Zoom, and now technology is AI. But in all cases of technological advancement, the value keeps coming back to human connection. It's funny how that happens.
It's funny. We need to remember that.
So, we need to remember that. So bonus question before we go, give us not your favorite, but a movie recommendation from your film class that would help us as we contemplate our humanity and as things get increasingly digital.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Well, I already mentioned Her. It was always one of my favorite movies long before I ever thought about AI. I mean, it's amazing. It says amazing stuff about relationships.
It does. And it forces me to remind folks just this week, as OpenAI announced they're going to be putting chatbots in Barbies, that people will be hiring employees whose best friend is not human. And what does that do for building company culture? What does that do for getting folks aligned with a strategy? And is a new vector of calcification towards a strategy change actually an LLM that's been trained on the way things have always been done in an organization, and that as you bring about a new way of thinking, that's rejected by the model? And is that a new level of change management? But I won't take us any further down that rabbit hole. But again, and one film besides Her that we should check out, and why.
Another movie that I've put in is Poor Things. This is a new one. Have you seen Poor Things?
No.
Okay, so it's kind of a Frankenstein type of movie. It's not Frankenstein exactly, but it's, like kind of a female Frankenstein story. And I've been teaching Frankenstein for the last couple semesters in my literature classes. So it kind of goes hand in hand. Poor Things and Frankenstein, because we get to talk about those big questions of what does it mean to be human, right? And what does it mean to recreate a human or try to create a human out of all of these bits and parts. And does that ever make a human, right? Like when we create these things. And so just the definition of what it means to be human in this world that we're living in, I think, revisiting Mary Shelley is a wonderful exercise in understanding that. So so those two kind of go hand in hand, Frankenstein and Poor Things.
Well, on my upcoming flight, I will download Poor Things and give you my human-generated report.
I love it. And just a word of warning, it's weird. It's a really weird one. It's not for kids.
All right. Noted.
But fun. It's so fun.
Perfect. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today and just share your experience on this journey. I think unfortunately, this adoption or ingesting this technology is a choose your own adventure for many folks. And being vulnerable, open, and candid about your experience certainly helped me think of rethink how I'm approaching things, and I know our audience will benefit as well. So just to keep an eye on your work and what you're writing, LinkedIn, Substack, where should folks be following you?
Yes, I can send you my Substack.
Please, we'll
my
include
Substack
all the
link and my LinkedIn link as well. I would love that. And I have a website, just kind of a landing page in case anyone wants to contact me. But yeah, please read my Substack, Natural Intelligence. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
If the name doesn't get you, I don't know what will.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on the show today.
Sure, it's been lovely. Thank you so much. As I say with every episode, I want it to feel like one of those really good cups of coffee you have with a friend. And you say, you know, I'm going to take a walk around the block before I get to my next thing just to digest what was shared. And I'll be certainly doing that here. So thanks.
Oh, thank you.